My friends, today we gather not to celebrate humiliation, but to recognize a moment when truth spoke without fear. In the halls of diplomacy, where power often silences principle, a voice from the East rose with quiet strength. Dr. Jaishankar, representing the soul of India, reminded the world that dignity is not a privilege of the powerful, but the right of the just. At the Quad Summit, he did not shout, yet his words echoed louder than thunder. What we witnessed was not an insult to any nation, but a call to every nation to rise above arrogance, to listen before leading, and to act with respect, not dominance. Let this moment be a lesson to the world. True leadership is not measured by how many follow you, but by how many rise because of you. As we reflect on this summit, let us ask not who was embarrassed, but who stood tall for truth. In the realm of international diplomacy, there exists a quiet expectation that power alone dictates the narrative. For too long, many nations have operated under the assumption that influence, wealth, and military strength grant them the authority to define what is right and what is wrong. However, history has shown us that such an approach, though temporarily effective, ultimately falters in the face of unwavering truth. At the recent Quad Summit, a significant moment unfolded when India's External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar did not conform to the expectations of deference that often accompany interactions with dominant global powers. Instead, he chose to speak from a position rooted not in provocation, but in principle, a principle that reminds the world that diplomacy must serve the cause of truth and not merely the agendas of the powerful. True diplomacy is not about appeasement or submission. It is about building bridges on the foundation of mutual respect. When a nation speaks with honesty, even when the truth is uncomfortable, it is not engaging in hostility, it is participating in the highest form of international engagement. Dr. Jaishankar's remarks, often firm yet measured, have come to symbolize a broader awakening across the developing world. These nations are no longer willing to be passive recipients of decisions made in distant capitals. They demand to be heard, to be understood, and to be treated as equal stakeholders in global affairs. His tone and content reminded the international community that India's foreign policy today is guided by national interest, strategic clarity, and most importantly, moral integrity. What makes this moment remarkable is not simply that an Indian leader spoke boldly, but that he did so without arrogance. He did not seek applause, nor did he seek confrontation. He presented India's position with calm conviction, a posture that unsettled those who are unaccustomed to being challenged. It is a moment that symbolizes the transformation of global diplomacy, a shift from hierarchical to horizontal dialogue. The days of one-sided narratives are fading, and in their place a new discourse is emerging, one where truth is no longer sacrificed at the altar of power. This approach is not unique to India alone, but it resonates deeply with nations across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, who see in this stance a reflection of their own long-silenced voices. They see a future in which diplomacy is not a performance of obedience, but an honest exchange of ideas, grounded in justice. They understand that speaking truth to power is not an act of rebellion, but of responsibility. And when that truth is spoken in the language of peace, it becomes impossible to ignore. Let this be understood by the world's most powerful. Silence is no longer the price of peace. India today stands not only as a regional power, but as a moral voice representing the dreams, struggles, and ambitions of the global South. At the Quad Summit, Dr. Jaishankar's stance did not just reflect the strategic priorities of India. It echoed the sentiment of countless nations who have long felt marginalized in global decision-making. The global South, comprising much of Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Pacific, has for decades watched powerful alliances dictate terms, set rules, and define global narratives without genuinely considering the voices of developing nations. What we witnessed through Jaishankar's words was not just a national assertion, but a collective expression of a vast and rising world that refuses to be ignored. For far too long, the concerns of the developing world have been sidelined, whether it's climate justice, economic equity, or fair access to technology and health. These nations have been told to wait, to follow, to comply. But today, a new reality is taking shape. As India speaks on global platforms, it carries with it not just its own interests, but the accumulated frustrations, aspirations, and resolve of billions. It speaks for those who demand a fairer share in shaping international rules. Jaishankar, with clarity and purpose, has positioned India not as a proxy for any major power, but as an independent force that bridges east and west, north and south. That position brings hope to nations long left behind in the power games of geopolitics. When India raises its voice to challenge one-sided narratives or imbalanced partnerships, it is not being defiant, it is being representative. It is speaking from the vantage point of shared experience, colonial history, economic disparity, and strategic neglect. This alignment with the global south is not a diplomatic tactic. It is a moral stance rooted in historical truth and contemporary necessity. As countries from the Caribbean to Central Africa look for leadership that understands their plight, India increasingly emerges as a natural advocate. The way Jaishankar articulated India's stance at the summit, unflinching yet diplomatic, reinforced this role on the world stage. This is not just about confrontation. It is about recalibration. When India asserts that global institutions must reflect today's realities rather than outdated hierarchies, it is making a case for inclusion and fairness. The current structure, where a few nations dominate decision-making, cannot endure in a world that is rapidly diversifying in power, influence, and aspiration. India's role, therefore, is not to replace old powers, but to reshape the table so that more voices can sit at it. That idea resonates deeply with emerging economies who see in India a path forward, one that does not force them to choose sides, but empowers them to stand on their own. India's voice is the voice of balance, history, and responsibility. It is the voice of a nation that has risen without conquest, led without coercion, and partnered without dominance. And in today's turbulent global landscape, such a voice is not just necessary, it is transformative. In international relations, respect is not something that can be demanded through economic dominance, military superiority, or political pressure. It is something that must be earned through consistency, integrity, and mutual understanding. At the Quad Summit, when Dr. S. Jaishankar spoke, he did not merely articulate India's position, he reminded the world that respect cannot be assumed by the powerful, nor can it be imposed upon the less powerful. It must arise from honest dialogue, fair treatment, and acknowledgement of each nation's sovereignty and dignity. The tone of his statements was not defiant, but dignified, and in that dignity lay the very essence of true leadership. What unsettled many was not the content of his words, but the clarity with which they were delivered, reflecting India's confidence and demand for equal treatment. Throughout modern history, many powerful nations have acted with the assumption that their status entitles them to special treatment and unquestioned authority in global forums. They have expected alliances to be one-sided, agreements to be favorable primarily to their interests, and dissent to be either muted or absent altogether. But the world is changing. Nations like India, rooted in ancient wisdom and modern capability, no longer see themselves as subordinate participants in global affairs. They see themselves as equals and expect to be treated as such. This shift in mindset is not arrogance, it is a recognition of India's growing responsibility on the world stage and a demand for relationships based on parity, not patronage. When Jaishankar pointedly challenged double standards and selective morality in global politics, he was not only speaking for India, he was voicing the frustration of many nations who have been dismissed or lectured by powers who fail to live by the values they preach. Whether it's on matters of international law, sanctions, trade, or security, India is saying what many have long thought, but were too cautious to express, that there must be one standard of respect for all, not different rules based on who holds more influence. The silence in response to his statements was not disapproval. It was recognition that the truth had been spoken plainly and powerfully. In this new geopolitical era, nations are judged not just by how strong they are, but by how fairly they engage with others. India's commitment to a multipolar world where no single power dominates speaks to a vision of balance and shared leadership. Respect grows when nations listen to each other, not when they dictate terms. It grows when partners treat one another as equals, not clients. By boldly advocating for this vision, India is helping redefine the meaning of global partnerships. And when Dr. Jaishankar refused to compromise India's position simply for the sake of harmony, it signaled a firm belief that long-term respect is far more valuable than short-term approval. This transformation in international dynamics requires a new kind of diplomacy, one grounded in truth, courage, and mutual accountability. It is no longer acceptable for countries to expect loyalty without offering equality. As more nations follow India's lead and begin to assert their rightful place at the table, the old order will gradually make way for a more just and inclusive world order, one where respect is not a tool of control, but the foundation of cooperation. Moral courage is the force that has shaped the most significant turning points in human history, and on the global stage today, it holds more weight than ever before. In an era where military alliances, economic leverage, and technological dominance often define global influence, it is easy to forget that the strength of a nation also lies in its ability to speak truthfully, act justly, and stand firm in its principles. At the Quad Summit, when Dr. S. Jaishankar firmly articulated India's stance without flinching in the face of global pressure, he demonstrated a kind of leadership rooted not in force, but in conviction. This display of moral courage sent a clear signal to the world that the currency of influence in the 21st century is no longer limited to arms or alliances. It includes integrity, independence, and the courage to challenge hypocrisy. India did not walk into that summit seeking confrontation, nor did it aim to embarrass any nation. But when faced with narratives that were either one-sided or dismissive, it did not hesitate to present its own with clarity and strength. This is not the diplomacy of the timid, nor the diplomacy of the aggressive. It is the diplomacy of the self-respecting, a diplomacy that recognizes that silence in the face of injustice is a form of surrender. By choosing to speak honestly, even when it risked disapproval from powerful partners, India showed that standing alone with dignity is preferable to standing together in silence. That moral posture resonates not just in conference halls, but in the hearts of millions around the world who long for leaders who prioritize values over validation. Around the world, many smaller or developing nations watch such interactions closely. They look for cues, examples, and validation of their own struggles to be heard and respected. When India, with its civilizational strength and democratic ethos, asserts its voice with courage, it creates a ripple effect. It tells the world that one does not need to possess nuclear weapons or the largest economy to speak boldly. One needs only a clear conscience and an unshakable sense of justice. This is the essence of moral courage. It does not rely on might, but on right. And in doing so, it holds a mirror to the rest of the world, forcing even the most powerful to reflect on their actions. In moments like these, global diplomacy is redefined. Rather than echoing pre-approved narratives or bowing to geopolitical pressure, India is demonstrating that responsible leadership means asking difficult questions and refusing to accept convenient answers. This type of courage challenges the foundations of selective morality that have long dictated global politics. It demands consistency not just in ideals, but in practice. It calls out those who speak of freedom while enabling occupation, those who advocate for peace while profiting from conflict, and those who promote equality while practicing exclusion. True global leadership does not come from how loudly one can speak, but from how deeply one can stand. By standing firm on its values, India is emerging not just as a power, but as a conscience in global affairs. This is a powerful shift, one that redefines what strength means in our time. It proves that the ability to walk alone with your principles intact is far more powerful than walking with others while your integrity is compromised. The world today stands at a crossroads where the old models of global power are beginning to crumble under the weight of their own contradictions. For decades, international institutions and alliances have operated within a framework largely defined by a handful of dominant nations, often sidelining the perspectives and priorities of the majority. However, recent global developments, including the assertive and principled stance taken by India at the Quad Summit, suggest a clear shift is underway, a shift toward a new world order that values balance, dignity, and dialogue over unilateralism and coercion. When Dr. S. Jaishankar confidently voiced India's independent position, he wasn't merely representing national interest. He was symbolizing a growing global demand for fairness, mutual respect, and inclusive leadership. This new order does not reject cooperation, but redefines its terms. It insists that partnerships must be built on equal footing, not through pressure, not through dependency, but through genuine dialogue and shared goals. The days of dictating terms and expecting submission are fading. Emerging powers, with their rising economic strength and diplomatic maturity, are making it clear that they will not be silent observers in a system that does not serve their people's future. India, as a leading voice among these nations, is helping to craft a world where dialogue replaces dominance and where no one nation can monopolize truth or morality. This is a profound evolution, and it carries the potential to bring lasting stability and justice to international relations. Balance is at the heart of this transformation. Balance between East and West, North and South, tradition and modernity, power and responsibility. A new global framework must acknowledge the legitimacy and contributions of all nations, not just those who hold historical advantages. That balance will not come easily, but it begins with leaders who are willing to challenge the status quo not through aggression, but through conviction. India's position, as articulated by Dr. Jaishankar, is a blueprint for how such a transition can occur peacefully. It demonstrates that assertiveness and diplomacy can coexist, and that strength need not be loud to be effective. Dignity also plays a central role in this emerging world order. For too long, many nations have been expected to compromise their dignity in exchange for aid, security, or recognition. They have been forced into unequal agreements and subjected to lectures from those who rarely practice what they preach, but that era is waning. As India rises, it carries with it a message that dignity is non-negotiable, that every nation, regardless of size or wealth, has the right to be treated with respect. This message inspires others who have long endured imbalance in global systems and encourages them to reclaim their voice. Dialogue, finally, is the thread that can weave this new order together. Not all disagreements must lead to division. Not all criticism is confrontation. Through open and respectful conversation, even the most complex geopolitical tensions can be addressed without resorting to threats or ultimatums. India's growing role as a bridge builder between ideologies, between economies, between civilizations shows that leadership today must be rooted in listening as much as speaking. This is the essence of modern diplomacy: understanding without surrender, engagement without erasure. In rising to these principles, India is not only defending its own sovereignty, but helping to lay the groundwork for a more humane and balanced international system, one where fairness, truth, and mutual respect are the pillars, and where global peace is built not on fear, but on shared purpose.